This podcast is sponsored by Go Play Sports, the brand new mobile app changing the game for grassroots. Whether it's Sunday League or five-a-side, Go Play Sports makes it easy to track attendance, manage teams and cut out the manual admin. No more endless group chats, no more chasing payments, just turn up and play. Go Play Sports. Download now from your app store.
We'll get into the summer transfer targets. I'm sure Ron and Ash are going to ping some names at you shortly.
Bring
Dan,
it. Let's go.
Let's do it.
I'll let you set the scene. So, how are the club looking at it heading into the summer? Obviously, no manager confirmed at this point, and unlikely. It looks like, as we get into the transfer window opening. So, how are the club playing that in terms of targets and trying to sell it to players of come and join the biggest club in the world, but we don't know who the manager is?
Look, I'm not trying to give her the big one just because deadline day is our thing, but I feel like this is going to be the most interesting, the most significant summer transfer window for a long time at Manchester United. I mean, and I say that for a few reasons. I mean, I'll get back to your question, Steve, 100%. But I think to give context, I mean, you look at the outgoings, first of all, there is a reason why United are linked with so many players incoming, because they're probably going to lose around 8 to 10, senior players, right? Whether those are on loan, Rasmus Højlund, Marcus Rashford, Andre Onana. But then you also look, they're very likely to lose Joshua Zirkzee, Emmanuel Ugarte, Terrell Malacia, who, look, they're not playing a lot, but they're named on the match day squad. They fill the bench. So, those are players United have to replace. Now, whether those are some academy players like a Shea Lacey, let's wait and find out how some of the academy players progress before the end of the season. But they are going to lose quite a few players. But with that, and if they do get back into the Champions League, look, teams who get back into the Champions League or who just get to the group stage get £16 million. The English teams this year who've reached the last 16 have made well over £40 million in total. So that is quite significant. You add the fees they're going to get for Rasmus Højlund. Whether Marcus Rashford ends at Barcelona, we can maybe talk about him separately, but whatever fee they get for him, that will be well over 25 million. So you're actually looking at United recouping, probably getting back in the Champions League, over £100 million with wages saved as well, and Casemiro, Jadon Sancho. So look, is that in itself is quite significant, the amount of players who are leaving. And then you look at the players incoming. I mean, I actually said this to a friend the other day. The fact Manchester United are linked with the biggest midfielders, best young midfielders in the country is quite incredible. Let's not forget the journey we've got to get here. A few Januaries ago, we're talking about Odi Nagalo and about Weghorst as emerging. No, but and that's no disrespect to them, but that is where Manchester United were at.
Yep. We finished 15th 9 months ago, or 16th or whatever it was.
Yeah, and you look at Tottenham.
We went to Bilbao. We know the pain.
Yeah, and I was there as well. And you also look at where Tottenham went from that final as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's all I'm saying is there's so much context here, and kind of look, it's been a really rough few years. People leaving the club for financial reasons and having to cost cut, but you look at where they're looking at and the market they're looking at. I'm not saying that justifies people losing their wage or anything like that. But all I'm saying is the club is in a very different position to 4, 5, 6 years ago. And look, midfield is of course the priority, but as I reported last week, left wing and left back, I think, are pretty high up there now as well. I think with the change in formation under Carrick, I think left back to me is perhaps the most interesting position. I think we all know what they need in midfield, but left back is very interesting because of how Carrick plays. When they attack, we don't ask him like Ruben Amorim about tactics and formations, but when they attack, one of the full-backs, whether that's Diogo Dalot, kind of inverts quite high up on the opposing line. Now, Luke Shaw maybe isn't capable of doing that anymore physically, so he comes back into that 3. But I think what United miss is that width on the left when Cunha comes in. So that's why they're looking at left backs like Nathaniel Brown and Lewis Hall. So I think that's very interesting because Luke Shaw's contract expires next summer. And he's also, I think, going to be 31, 32. So they need to really future-proof that position as well. So in short, that's kind of what we're looking at.
Cool. I'll let the boys ping you now. Ron, I know you've got.
Go on, Ron. You got names.
Come
I
on,
can see it.
get it all you got. It's fine.
Just give the names. Go.
I've got a long list.
He's got a list, yeah.
It's all right. I'll finish the list.
Right.
Before we get into names, and Dan, thanks so much for that context. Just sort of around planning for the summer, are they still sort of scenario planning, sort of Champions League and without Champions League, would you say? Or are they pretty sure based on league position and with 7 games to go, we're going to be in the Champions League? Or do you still think there's that contingency in place of not meeting Champions League?
So all I can say is we were talking about your Elliot Andersons, your Collis Believers well before Michael Carrick was in the job. And this was where Manchester United were at under Ruben Amorim in January, even before January, before he was sacked by the club. So even in December, from my understanding, they were already still pursuing these type of midfielders. Now, I think Champions League football opens up the possibility of reinforcing the squad in other positions, not just left wing, left back, but I think it'd be very interesting as well to see maybe if they look at another forward or even potentially a right back, for example, because there's not a lot of depth there for another season. Nusama Mazraoui hasn't played a lot of football this year either, really, when you think how important he was last year. So I think it's very interesting. Do they look at another goalkeeper if Bayern also leaves? Radek Vitek's had a great loan at Bristol City. But anyway, to answer your question, Ron, I think there's always their long-term targets haven't changed with or without Champions League football. I just think the amount they would be able to do in the window.
Yeah, it gets harder if you don't have the Champions League.
Yeah,
of course,
and would they try and get that depth, without Champions League football? Probably not. Would they look to upgrade certain positions? Probably not. So I think also, just to go back, Steve, to your question and kind of answers your question as well, Ron, I think with Michael Carrick, he is being canvassed, of his opinion on what they need and what maybe certain players would look like in this team, because they have to. I mean, he is, but I think it's very interesting that, they are asking his opinion. I'm not saying his opinion is final, but they're definitely asking him about his thoughts on different players who are at the club, but also potential targets as well. I think it'd be quite silly, not in a disrespectful way to the hierarchy, but silly not to include him in those discussions and decisions.
Of course. Yeah. So if we look at sort of positions, and you've touched on a few there already around left back and the wing back areas, but for me, obviously the biggest hole clearly in the summer that we're going to address that's been meted is very much in midfield. Obviously with Casemiro on his way out, I still think there's question marks, and perhaps you can talk a little bit more to that around Bruno Fernandes and whether he will be staying another year or whether he will be departing in the summer. But clearly there's a gap in midfield, and we've had that, for the last couple of years now, I would say at least. Obviously, Kobbie Mainoo coming back into the fold has certainly helped that. But just wanting to get your take on some players. We've been linked quite heavily in the last few days, or certainly the last couple of weeks, around some of the Newcastle boys and Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes. Any sort of truth in those players?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right to talk about Bruno Fernandes. I think, first of all, I think he made it clear he doesn't want to talk about his future until after the World Cup, but I think United have made it quite clear they want him to stay, for quite a long time. The problem is this clause, right? This £57 million clause that teams outside of the Premier League can activate, which, so that exists. That is a thing. So what I think United will work towards is probably a new contract. I'm not saying a longer contract per se, maybe an extra year added on, but probably to get rid of that clause. But again, context is really important, because I this is my opinion, by the way, but I think under Ruben Amorim, Bruno Fernandes is expendable in his system. If Amorim somehow makes, the season a positive and they finish top 4, I think Bruno Fernandes is expendable in that system, because there weren't a lot of legs there. I think in a 2, even though he was still performing extremely high, you needed more legs in that midfield quite clearly. You needed more dynamic midfielders, because you have the 10s and the striker and the wing backs. So,
and his numbers just wouldn't be there, right? If he's playing in a 6 or an 8 as an example compared to a 10. Yeah,
absolutely, Ron. So, although he was still dictating games a little bit, the system didn't suit him. So if United would have got 80 million for him again in the summer from Saudi, I think you do sell him in that sense. But now, under Michael Carrick and as in a 40, he's absolutely priceless. I mean, he is, And I'm really happy to see finally everyone getting on the bandwagon of he is one of the best players in the Premier League, and he should. I asked Michael Carrick the question after the Tottenham game in February. I asked him, is it fair to say he's one of the best players in the Premier League right now? And I'm really happy everyone else started talking about their podcasts after that. You know, like,
Quick one, Dan. Is he your player of the season,
catch
Bruno?
up, guys. He is absolutely. He's the most influential player this season, and that to me is the player of the season. I don't look at anyone in the Arsenal team who, you know, of course they're going to win the league, but I wouldn't say any of the, as a collective, they've won the league. Have any of those individuals influenced where that league has gone? I don't think so. I mean, I think they've shown, right? They've had injuries throughout the season. They've changed the striker. They've changed the midfield. As a collective, by far the best team. But, you know, Saliba or Gabriel, you know, have missed games, but Mosquera comes in or, you know, so look, that would be my argument. But look, Bruno Fernandes, I think will want to stay as well, but it'll be really interesting. If he sees United going for these big targets, why would you not want to stay? You know, if you
Yeah.
know you're finally going to be surrounded by top talent where you don't have to, if you know, in a dream scenario, have Elliot Anderson and Kobe Mainoo and Collis Belieber doing a lot of your running and you're not having to be the guy. You know, look, I think that's been the positive of United's last few games is he hasn't had to play hero ball every game. You know,
Yeah.
maybe some of the wins haven't been there, but they're not as reliant on it because Mateus Cunha can score out of nothing. You know, Brian Mbeumo, although he's been a bit off the boil, they have other players. And actually, I think the hope is if they enforce the midfield, some of these other players will probably improve as well. So to answer your question, Ron, I think his future will absolutely be a topic we talk about, but don't think there's any feeling that he's definitely leaving this summer. I think Bruno Guimaraes is very interesting because he's been consistently someone I've been told that there's not really that much interest in. You know, he's someone United like, but in terms of we're prioritizing the list, he's not that high up. But Sandro Tonali absolutely is. So, you know, I think Tonali is an interesting one. I think from what I've heard and what I'm understanding, look, I think at one point in his career, he's going to want to go back to Italy. So whether that, I mean, Italian football can't really afford him at the moment.
You got good Italians in Manchester, to be fair. You got
Yeah, exactly.
San Carlo
So,
and
so I think that's the only caveat is I just wonder how much of this is agent chat. There's no doubt Manchester United like him and he's very high on their list if he's attainable. But how really look, my colleague Keith Downey, we did a transfer show together the other day. He said it himself. You know, there's no one who knows more, you know, than Newcastle United than Keith. He said, look, Bruno Guimaraes very unlikely to leave the club as captain in his age. But if one of those two midfielders were to leave, it would be Sandro Tonali. So
Tonali.
I think
Yeah.
there'll be an absolute race for him. But with the United, you know, I thought Kolanka from the Athletic made a great point the other day. I was listening to him and he made a great point about Kobe Mainoo when we talk about the midfield. And I absolutely agree with him. Is we really have to talk about this as well when we talk about the midfield is who do we think is a good complementary piece for Kobe Mainoo as well? You know, because if he's going to sign a new contract, which it looks like he is, who do we think is good next to him? I mean, it depends on the games, of course, but you know that's probably why to me I think Elliot Anderson, Collis Believer, probably the two I think United should go for. I don't see Adam Wharton as a natural complementary piece to next to Kobe, for example. So I think it's very interesting to see how that will unravel. But with Elliot Anderson, for example, there's a lot of competition for him. You know, Manchester City really like him as well, but that might be dependent on Pep Guardiola's future. So you know, I wish I could tell you, Ron, kind of exactly
No, of course.
who's
Yeah.
coming in the summer, but it's just funny because when you work in the world of transfers, so many things are attached to others, and also some decisions. Sene Lammens is a great example. That decision was made so far at the end of the transfer window. You know, like essentially between him and Emi Martinez. And I was at Carrington when he comes on deadline day, and you know, Emi Martinez is you know, really upset at Bodymouth Heath because he's been told United's not going for him. So, you know, a lot of these things, I can talk about it on TV and, you know, report all week what United are going to do right now. But it's just crazy how things change in such a short space of time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll let
I
Ash
think
come in. I
on
know he's itching
no,
to go.
I think on that basis, like as we speak today, like on the two midfielders, my preference is like, and I'm accounting budget as well. Elliot Anderson, number one for sure. I think he's been outstanding. All the metrics. So I don't need to like go into it with you, Dan. But let's just say I agree with you. By the way, if we had the money, I'd still get Carlos Baleba. I think he complements Mainu well. He's got the ground coverage, the angles with the left foot. So there's a nice balance, and he's a good age profile. But let's just be realistic, and let's say Brighton asked for the crazy type of money that they generally try to do. I think kind of like an underrated midfielder, and like he could be relegated soon, is João Gomez at Wolves. I think if we got Elliot Anderson and someone like him, for me, that's like midfield ticked, in terms of, like transfers done in that position. But yeah, what's the talk about like João Gomez? Like, do you think that's someone that United are looking at? I mean, he's probably a little bit lower down as the second midfield option.
I think there's also scope, by the way, for potentially three midfielders if they can make the money work. If Ugarte and, as I mentioned, if they recoup all this money we talk about in the summer, they're going to need a fourth midfielder anyway, in there. I completely agree. I actually love João Gomez. And I said this the other day on the transfer show, and Alan Pardew kind of agreed with me as well. That and weirdly, I used to cover a lot of Wolves, and I actually broke the news when João Gomez joined Wolves.
Oh,
And
okay.
I had a free João Gomez T-shirt because there was a whole Wolves campaign around
no way.
freeing him from Brazil. But he's someone I really like, and to be honest, again, context is everything. I think he and Andre have been a bit disrespected this season because of where Wolves have found themselves this season. But two defensive midfielders or more defensive midfielders are never going to shine in a really poor defensive team. So when people say, "Oh, what's he done this season?" It was only a year ago, by the way, when he played against England for Brazil, everyone was saying, "Oh my God, João Gomez, what a player. He's a great midfielder." So yeah, I absolutely think he would be a great fit for Manchester United. And I think, like you mentioned, he would be somewhat cheaper. I think with Carlos Baleba, I don't think Brian can demand the fee that they demanded or wanted last summer because of his form. And I think they also have to be quite pragmatic with their business approach that, his value could only decline potentially. So this summer might be the biggest fee they can get for him, if that form continues. So I think they will have to take a lower fee regardless. But look, I think João Gomez again will be a player who a lot of clubs look at as that slightly cheaper option. He is on the list for Manchester United. He's absolutely someone they're monitoring. And I wouldn't be surprised because look, Manchester United, they want a 6 and an 8. That's why they're looking at a Belieber and an Anderson. Anderson can do a bit of both. And he has progressed into an outstanding midfielder. I did his first interview at Nottingham Forest when I used to cover the Midlands. And, he was just this shy kid. And I was asking him, how do you find your media? And he said, I'm a bit nervous, I'm not used to it yet. I don't know how I come across. And to see how he's just developed. I mean, he did the England news conference today, next to Thomas
Okay, yeah.
Tuchel, and the authority he now speaks with. And even at that time, he was playing left midfield, then he played right midfield, then he was playing as a 10, and then now he's a great 8 and a 6 for England and Nottingham Forest. So, I think he fits Manchester United, and I think he would be the most exciting, signing of the summer in a way. I think Belieber and Anderson, they were both needed because they're going to have different games next season, aren't they? In Europe and in the Premier League. So those are why, and you also just can't forget the defensive abilities you lose with Casemiro, right? I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of his roller coaster United career, his ability to just read where that game is flowing. Look, that won't be Belieber right away, but you have to hope that he can, do that. I think that's probably my only regret from last summer is I wish they could have got Belieber last summer just so he could spend a year behind Casemiro a little bit. Obviously, they weren't able to do that, but he is a punt though at this point in time, right? Because of his form, and he's been taken off early in games, so that will be a concern for Manchester United. But that's also an argument to Brian as to why they need to sell him a bit cheaper. I think one thing we've learned is United aren't going to budge on their evaluations of players, maybe compared to the hierarchy of the past. I mean, Brian and Buemo, remember last summer, they were adamant they're not going to spend any more.
It was the fishing trip, wasn't it, where it got signed off in the end by Jim?
And yeah, absolutely. But, they had their evaluation. Šeško was the same. Their deal for Šeško was less than what Newcastle ended up offering. But I think this United leadership, rightly or wrongly, are very big on we want the player to want to be here. So this is our evaluation. They want the player to almost not tell the club they want to leave, but yeah, I want to be a Manchester United player. So that will be the interesting thing in the summer is who that works with and who it doesn't. If they have Champions League football, obviously it's much more attractive.
Yeah, fair
So
enough.
we'll give you some other names in other positions because I know we could talk about midfield all
Oh,
day. So you mentioned left back, you mentioned Lewis Hall, but how much are we linked with the West Ham lad El Hadj Diouf?
yeah, I think he is someone United are looking at. I mean, I'd be really surprised if he wasn't someone on the list in that sense. But look, I think it's very early for Doof. I mean, I think a bit like João Gomez, he's had more experience in the Premier League, though. Doof is still very young, 1 year in the Premier League. I think when you compare to Nathaniel Brown and Lewis Hall, the one thing they have is multiple seasons of elite football behind them. And I think for Manchester United, look, maybe they learned a little bit with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, just having, a solid season at Crystal Palace. They really need to future-proof that position, as I mentioned before, behind Luke Shaw and for that next year. I think it's probably very early for Doof. So, look, he would be someone I'd be surprised at this moment in time. He's not someone I've had a lot of momentum behind. I don't know if you're about to ask me about another left back, but Miles Lewis-Skelly, for example, is someone I'm hearing a lot
I was
more
going to ask you
around.
about him. Yeah.
He's someone that, I've heard a lot more noise around just over the last few weeks and, from different contacts, not just around Manchester, but around London as well, and even the England camp. So he's someone that, again, I would be really excited about if United could make that work because Arsenal, from our understanding, are quite not happy to sell him, but willing to sell him for financial, reasons, and they'll want to go again in the summer next season. And he's just not playing football. So he's young, he's, English in the sense of, helps having, likes of Harry Maguire, Luke Shaw there, also the, quota, but also he can play midfield as well. And I think he would be a fun signing because he'll want to prove something, having not played a lot of football. And I think that's what United need a little bit as well. So look, I think he's probably more someone I've heard of than Doof in recent
Yeah,
times.
no, fair enough. And I'll give you like two last ones to like touch on. So you mentioned a left winger attacker. Give us some names, and then finally, because it's been talked about centre back, but it's probably a little bit lower down the list. Like, give me some names. Like, I'll throw one at you, and then you can tell me Schlotterback, and then you can just freestyle away with those positions, my friend.
No, is what I've heard about Schlotterbeck. Only because it sounds like he's signing a new contract at the
Okay.
moment. So I think Schlotterbeck looks very unlikely. I think centre back, look, I think it's something United, if they can, it's a bit like last summer. You just can't address every position. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's really hard because last summer everyone was talking about, oh, they need a midfielder. They need it. Well, they've just spent £200 million on attackers and a goal. No team can just buy it, maybe unless Manchester City about 8 years ago, you can buy 4 new fullbacks and a goalkeeper. Like, it's just not possible anymore. So I think centre back, look, Aiden Heaven and Lenny Yoro haven't actually played a lot this season. So you hope that they take a step next season. I mean, Aiden Heaven was training with Thomas Tuchel's team over this international break, which I think is a great step for him. Harry Maguire looks like he's going to sign a new contract. I think the question mark, this is a side tangent to question, Ash, but they will have a decision to make on the likes of Lisandro Martinez, Matthias de Ligt, and Mason Mount because their injury records, as good as they are, quality-wise, and Matthias de Ligt was probably United's player of the season to, beginning of December, or November when he got that back injury. He's not been seen since. Ruben Amorim said in his news conference, he'll be back soon.
Next week, I think.
Yeah.
He said. Yeah.
We're
Said a few days.
We're in
There you
April,
go.
so that a bit his career has had a period of that, right? Has it had a pattern of injuries? Lisandro Martinez now, another injury. Mason Mount, is really upsetting because he started the season so well. So look, centre back might be something they have to look at if they decide look, we just don't feel solid enough in their fitness records, though we might need another centre back in that sense. Don't think it's a priority right now, but something they're going to have to make a decision on, I think, as they approach the end of the season. I think left wing, reported last week, but look, in January, I mentioned Yandu Mande was someone that they were looking at. I think it's very interesting because what I'm hearing now is he is becoming quite a big priority for Manchester United, because that left wing position, again, maybe this comes with a change of system, but it's become quite apparent United want this right-footed left winger. And I think it's also becoming quite apparent. I know I've said this about a few players, but again, it shows where United are at. He is a player in quite high demand around Europe. 19 years old. He has quite a lot of goal contributions for his age this season, but also his metrics are very impressive. Again, at 19 years old. So my colleagues in Sky Germany were reporting today that they might look to offer him a new contract and they would hope he might stay another year, but they're also willing to sell him for, under £100 million this summer. Obviously, you would hope that would be significantly less for anyone interested in him, but RB Leipzig are really good sellers as well. So left wing is a position. Yandu Mande is the one I've heard the most about. Iliman Njai is another one, but very different profile, probably more similar to Mateus Cunha. So he is someone United are monitoring, but I'd be very surprised if they went down that route. It's funny, in January, this was only a whiff, but someone mentioned the name Callum Hudson-Odoi, not as a starting left winger, but as a potential option they could look at. Again, probably a bit more direct, which compared to Njai would make more sense, more affordable as well. And I think in the summer it'll be very interesting because I wonder if United do make some of these supplementary signings, a bit like Sene Lammens, where you do just take a few punts,
With the squad, beef up
around
the
the
squad.
squad. Exactly. And you kind of look at the depth chart and you kind of go, okay, well, maybe we do add one here and one there just for some competition and, as you mentioned, to beef up the squad run.
I'm interested, and this all links to what we've been talking about with the transfers. Ineos talk about Project 28 and trying to win the league, right? By that point, I just wonder now in terms of how aggressive they are with their strategy in the transfer market, and your intake on this as to do they actually believe that? I mean, it's one thing saying it, but do they believe they can win the league, and that will then drive the transfer market and the caliber of talent they're going to go after, clearly. And I just wonder now, is this a poignant opportunity? You look at Pep and City, you're not quite sure whether Pep's going to stay. Liverpool are struggling at the moment. Chelsea are struggling. We sort of walk into next season if we can clinch that Champions League place. Obviously Arsenal are Arsenal at the moment, and it looks like they're going to go on to win the league. Are we set up perhaps, to really have a tilt at a potential, title race next season, depending on transfers? So just your take on how aggressive they can be around that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you even think this season, Ron, I mean, you turn some of those, draws and losses. I mean, you think
Yeah.
Everton at Old Trafford and the Wolves draws and West
Yeah.
Ham at home and,
December.
there are some games where you go Nottingham Forest away. That's just a good point. Tottenham coming back, to get a 2-2 draw. Some of those are just fair enough points. But you look where United could be if those really bad performances were turned into, they would be a point or two off Arsenal, right? And maybe
Yeah.
that's a result of where the season is at. But anyway, to answer your question, look, I think the 28 project of winning the title by then, look, I think it's good to have a collective goal in any business to bring everyone together and have that kind of tunnel vision of
Yeah.
this is the aim. This is what we're making all of our decisions based on right now. I also think there'll be some realism at Carrington as to where the team are at, say based on next season, how they perform. I mean, look, start of this season, when people were saying United should be in a Champions League position, everything I was hearing was, look, we'll be happy just to be back in European football. I mean, no, one thing I would say is I don't get the feeling, and this isn't me kind of backing people at the club for the sake of it or because I'm there every week, but one thing I have to say is I don't get a feeling that there's unrealistic kind of dreams at Carrington where everyone goes, we're Manchester United, so we should be at the top. We're Manchester United. I think they're very realistic as to where the team are at and where they want to be. Now, look, I think the 28 target, we'll see. Like you said, I think it does give them that ability, though, I think, in the transfer window to go for it, though. And that is kind of the means as to all the cost cutting over the last few years and whatnot. To be honest, I think the aim just needs to be a bit like Arsenal, and that's not to be like, oh, we should be like our rivals, a bit like David Moyes. But I think the main objective for Manchester United is not to be up and down anymore. It just needs to be solid top three, solid two for a few years. Just be consistently in the Champions League, so you
Yeah.
build a pattern. Look, 28 is great. I'm sure everyone hopes that that's still a possibility, but that's not dependent on Manchester United, is it? I mean, that's dependent on where Liverpool are at, where Manchester City are at, where Arsenal are at. You know, is Pep Guardiola still in the Premier League, for example? You know, so I think there's too many factors to say, you know, is that
It's
still
going to happen,
realistic?
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But to answer your question, though, I think that's still the feeling that that's what everyone's aiming for. And Michael Carrick was actually asked about it in a news conference I was in, and someone said, like, is that a thing? And he was like, yeah, like that. I know that's like the messaging, but it's still really early to kind of say where we're at in
Where we're at.
correlation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, would anyone guess this season in the Premier League, for
Well, yeah,
example?
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Well,
Well,
if you plot it on a graph last season and this season, we are going to win the league next season, right? But
Yeah.
Dan, you've been very, very generous with your time. I'm going to save you now because these boys will go at you all night with names. So, just very final point I just want to ask you around is like, you know, I think you mentioned it there. We're Manchester United, especially as us fans. You know, for us, we're the biggest club in England, in the world, arguably. How is it for you? Like, you know, you mentioned there some of the other clubs you've covered in the past, like, you know, Wolves, Midlands areas, right? So, like, what's the journey been like for you, just briefly, in terms of now reporting on Manchester United for the biggest sports broadcaster out there? Like, tell us briefly about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty incredible, really. This is my 5th year being a reporter at Sky Sports News. I've been at Sky Sports News since I was 21, so all in all, 9 years. 9 years, 9 years. 'Cause I'm now 30.
Wow.
Anyway,
Oh, nice. Congrats.
there has been a journey, and I think, look, you know, Manchester United, you know, as you mentioned, see, massive club, one of the biggest in Europe, one of the biggest in the world, of course. You know, if not the biggest. I'm sure all Manchester United fans listening to this will say they're the biggest. But I think the most incredible thing is, I don't think you can quite quantify that size, you know, until you work on Manchester United. You know, for example, I remember start of the season, Tyrone Malacia is back from, you know, the wilderness and is training for the first time with, you know, the first team. And, you know, I was out open training that day. And, you know, we see it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm doing lives about it for the rest of the day. And this is about United's, what, third choice left back who's barely played 10 minutes all season. But I say that to everyone because I'm like, what other team in the league would we do this about? Like, even Liverpool, you know, Arsenal, City, I mean, you just wouldn't, you know, but there is such interest, isn't there, in everything that goes on at Manchester United. And I think, yeah, I hope I do this when I report on United consistently, and you know, when you see me report at Carrington or Old Trafford. But I think it's just really important to stay, you know, in the middle. And I know managers, you know, cliche say this all the time, like don't get too high and don't get too low. But I think it's quite easy to get caught up in the
Mm,
1 minute it's a disaster, 1 minute they're the
yeah.
best team in the world, you know? And I think everyone outside of United, you know, whether that's my colleagues who sometimes are in London or, you know, just the social media atmosphere can just be quite extreme. And, you know, it's quite nice for United to have a bit of stability now under Carrick because there's
Yeah.
less of that extremity. And, you know, just to finish off, Steve, really quick, it's just funny because I see a lot of fans at the moment talk about Tottenham, you know, Tottenham fans saying, oh my God, our club are getting demolished in the media. Everyone hates us. Why is everyone paying? Sky Sports News doesn't cover a club like this around the league. I'm like, do you not remember the start of the season? I was outside Carrington at Old Trafford every day talking about United.
Yeah.
Every club has to go through this at some point, you know. So it's nice that they're not there anymore. But yeah, Steve, to answer your question, it's a dream job, and you know, it's. I think everyone on the patch. I'm sure I speak for everyone on the patch who covers Manchester United. You know, there's no one. I'm telling you, as I've got to know everyone this year, no one has an agenda, and I'm telling you, all of us would love to be at covering Manchester United on their journey back to the top because frankly, there wouldn't be a bigger story in the country. You know, to see Manchester United be successful again consistently would be kind of the story of, you know, the last 20 years, to be honest, you know, because it's the story. So I think
Yeah.
that's what we're all hoping for eventually.
Yeah.
Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Great place to end Project 2028. Here we come.
Here we go.
Dream.
We're all on board, Ron.
Indeed. I just want to say, Dan, as well. I mean, thank you. We listened to you on Sky Sports, and you do a tremendous job, in terms of just telling the story as it is, and reeling it back to us fans. So, yeah, thank you for your great work.
Keep up the
Yeah.
good work,
Ron,
my
thanks
friend.
so
Yeah,
much.
brilliant.
Appreciate it, Ash. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so
It was
much,
a great
yeah.
chat to see you all.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll catch you on the next one.